Hey, I'm Tom. I don't know when I first felt it. This sense of steady confidence, the kind that makes you believe things can't go wrong. We were comfortable. Rebecca and I, for 4 years, we built something steady. I was 32, she was 31, and the future seemed a written thing, something you could read ahead of time, see all the chapters unfold before they did. Talk of marriage came easily. We joked about kids, argued playfully over where to live. She worked in healthcare, I worked in marketing. Different worlds, different rhythms, but it worked. We fit, like puzzle pieces. When I think about it now, it was those quiet evenings that made me certain we were solid. We'd curl up together on the couch, watch bad TV, talk about our days. Simple things, nothing fancy. But it was ours. And I never questioned it, not once. Not until things started to shift. Rebecca was always driven, her mind a carousel of deadlines, projects, the next patient, the next promotion. I admired her for it. I was content with my job, a comfortable middle ground between passion and paychecks. But even with the differences, we understood each other. Or at least, I thought we did. I'd say she was my anchor, the steady force in my life, and I guess I thought she saw me the same way. The first cracks weren't obvious. They came as little things, whispers of changes. Small enough to be dismissed, unnoticed, really. I told myself I was imagining it. Rebecca had always been a busy person, someone whose mind was constantly spinning. But there was a difference now. Late nights became more frequent, and it wasn't just work. Sometimes she'd come home late, smell faintly of coffee, like she'd been out, but she never said where. At first, I thought nothing of it. Her career was demanding, after all. I admired her drive. But she started disappearing more often, making excuses to avoid spending time together. I noticed it in the little things. Her phone, she'd never been protective of it before, but now it was always face down, locked when it never had been. I'd ask about it, and she'd laugh it off, but I could see the walls going up, piece by piece. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was too needy, too demanding. Maybe I didn't give her enough space. But the nagging feeling in my gut only grew louder. I started keeping track, checking our calendars, our texts. Something wasn't adding up. I didn't want to admit it, but I had a feeling. And feelings like that, gut feelings, they don't lie. It wasn't until I found the messages that I let myself believe it. She thought I wouldn't see, but I did. I found them in a thread with her friend, casual at first, but as I read, the words cut deep. It wasn't just harmless. It was an affair. With a close friend from college. A guy I trusted. A guy who knew me, who knew us. I could hardly breathe as I scrolled through the conversations, the jokes, the plans. It wasn't a one-time thing. It had been going on for months. I confronted Rebecca the next day, my heart pounding. I needed answers. But she looked at me with those wide eyes, that feigned innocence, and dismissed it as nothing. "Oh, come on, it's not what you think," she said, trying to laugh it off. "It was just a joke. Nothing serious." I didn't know how to respond to that. To be so casually dismissed, to be made to feel like I was crazy for believing what I'd seen with my own eyes. And that, I think, is when everything shifted for me. When the foundation I thought was so sturdy cracked beneath my feet. Weeks passed, and what used to feel like smooth, steady ground between us started to feel unsteady. It wasn't one thing, but a series of small changes that added up over time. Rebecca, who had always been open and affectionate, became more distant, like I was slowly losing her without fully understanding why. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just a phase, maybe due to work stress or some other external factor. I didn't want to face the truth, and so, I let myself ignore the growing doubts. But as time wore on, the signs couldn't be ignored. She started staying late at work more often. Whenever I asked about it, she'd shrug it off, saying she had a lot on her plate. And when I tried to talk about it, her excuses seemed less convincing each time. It wasn't just the late nights, it was the little things, too. She'd text or scroll through her phone when we were supposed to be having dinner together. More and more often, she'd make excuses to avoid spending time with me. A quick catch-up call with a friend, a dinner meeting, a friend from work in town for a few days. It was always something. The shift was gradual, but unmistakable. She became more secretive with her phone, pulling it out of sight when I walked into the room. A few weeks ago, I caught her texting someone in the middle of the night, something she hadn't done before. I tried not to make it a big deal, but each time she seemed to hide something, it bothered me more. I kept telling myself it was nothing, but that uneasy feeling gnawed at me. One evening, I couldn't stand it anymore. She had gone to bed early, and the house was quiet, too quiet. I picked up her phone from the counter, half hoping I wouldn't find anything. I knew I was crossing a line, but my gut was telling me I had to know the truth. When I unlocked her phone, it felt like time slowed down. The first text I saw was innocuous enough, a simple, "Hey, are you still up?" from a number I didn't recognize. But then it was followed by another, and another, each one more personal than the last. Inside jokes, flirtatious comments, things that didn't belong between her and this person. I didn't want to believe it. It didn't feel real. This was Rebecca, the woman I was planning a future with. But it was there, in black and white, staring at me. My heart dropped, and a lump formed in my throat. I sat there for what felt like hours, reading through the messages. There was no denying it. She had been seeing someone. My best friend, Jake. Jake. It wasn't just a random acquaintance or someone she worked with. He was someone I'd known for years, someone I trusted. The guy I went to college with, who had been there for me through thick and thin. And now, he was the one crossing boundaries I never thought possible. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced, spinning through every conversation we'd had, every moment that now seemed like a lie. How long had this been going on? Was I just blind to it? I couldn't stay in this house any longer, so I grabbed my coat and went for a walk. I needed to clear my head, but the weight of what I had just discovered didn't leave me. When I came back, she was already awake, acting like everything was normal. The usual routine. A quick kiss on the cheek as I entered the room. But I couldn't look at her the same way. Something had shifted. I wasn't sure what to do next, but I knew I couldn't pretend anymore. Something had to change. Rebecca's 31st birthday arrived, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to put everything aside, at least for a night. Her family was coming over, and some of our mutual friends were expected, too. I didn't want to make a scene, but the tension had been building for weeks. I knew something was off, but I wasn't sure what to expect. Her acting so carefree made it feel like nothing was wrong, but I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in the back of my mind. I watched as she laughed, surrounded by family and friends. She seemed happy, maybe even more than usual, but there was a sense of distance in her eyes when she looked at me. I had to remind myself to breathe, to act normal, but the pit in my stomach wouldn't go away. The way she smiled at Jake across the room, the little inside jokes, the way she leaned in to whisper something to him, it was like a punch in the gut. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the cake and the music. Everyone was talking, laughing, and it should have been a fun celebration. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching a performance, a facade. There was nothing real about the way Rebecca was acting, not with me anyway. It was all for show. The party went on, and time seemed to stretch. It wasn't until later, when most of the guests had made their speeches and shared their stories about Rebecca, that I finally spoke up. Everyone was waiting for my turn, a tradition we'd kept through the years. I didn't plan it. I didn't even know what I was going to say when I stood up, but it came out. My voice cut through the room, steady but sharp, like I'd been holding my breath for months. Trust, I said. Loyalty. It's something you expect in a relationship, right? But when it's broken, it changes everything. Rebecca turned to me, her face tight with confusion. The room went silent. I could see her trying to read my expression, her face flushing with uncertainty. I didn't look at her. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up with the messages I'd found weeks ago, between her and Jake. I sent them to the group chat, the one with everyone at the table. The buzz of notifications filled the silence as people began reading the texts. The room felt like it was closing in on me. I stood there, waiting, watching. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this moment, but I knew it had to happen. No more hiding. Rebecca's face drained of color. She stood up quickly, knocking her chair over, her eyes wide with shock. "Tom, stop," she said, her voice breaking. "This isn't." But I was done. I didn't let her finish. I couldn't. "I didn't want to be the guy who aired out dirty laundry," I said, my voice cold. "But I'm not going to stand here and pretend everything's fine when you've been lying to me." Her eyes darted around the room. Some of our friends looked uncomfortable, unsure of what to say, while others were clearly disgusted. I could hear the whispers, the soft murmurs. The truth was out, and it was messy. Rebecca ran out of the room, tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking. I didn't go after her. I wasn't going to chase her anymore. What was left to say? The rest of the night was a blur. Some of our friends tried to console me, but others were just as confused as I was. Rebecca's family didn't know how to respond. Some of them looked at me like I'd done something unforgivable by exposing the truth. But there was no going back now. When the guests finally left, the house felt emptier than it ever had before. The air was thick with unspoken words, and the silence between us was deafening. I didn't know what would come next, but I wasn't sure I cared anymore. The truth had come out, and the fallout was inevitable. The day after the party was like stepping into a new reality. The weight of what happened hung over everything. I couldn't escape it, and neither could anyone else. Rebecca had left in tears, and it didn't take long for word to spread. Our phone's notifications went off constantly, people offering support, some expressing disbelief, others questioning the way I'd handled it. By the time the dust settled, I had no idea what kind of version of the truth had been shared, but it didn't matter anymore. The reactions from our social circle were divided, like watching a split in a once solid foundation. Some stood by me, others sided with Rebecca, and a few just didn't know what to think. The most difficult part was hearing people say I'd gone too far, that I'd humiliated her. They didn't understand. They weren't there, didn't know what it had been like in the months leading up to that moment. They didn't see how much it hurt, how the trust had been shattered piece by piece until I had nothing left but a quiet fury. There was a clear divide in how people saw my actions. On one side, friends said it was a wake-up call. They applauded me for taking control of the situation, for exposing the truth when everyone else wanted to pretend it wasn't happening. "People need consequences for their actions," said Mike, one of my closest friends. "You can't just let it slide. What else were you supposed to do?" He was right. I'd been patient for months, giving Rebecca chances to come clean, to admit what was happening. But instead, I'd watched her weave her lies, each one stacking on top of the last, until I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Some of the more conservative people in our circle expressed their opinions as well. They said it was disrespectful to air our dirty laundry in public, that I should have confronted Rebecca in private, not at a party. "There's no reason to make it public," said Sarah, someone I'd known for years. She didn't see how exposing Rebecca in front of everyone was the only way to make her face the truth. Keeping it hidden, letting her pretend everything was fine, would have been the easy way out. But I wasn't willing to do that anymore. Then there were the people who didn't know whose side to take. They'd seen the shift in our relationship but hadn't gotten involved. They heard the whispers about Rebecca's behavior but hadn't seen the proof. These people kept their distance, unsure of how to react, scared to choose a side. For them, the situation felt like something they could avoid, something that wasn't their problem. I wasn't angry with them, though. Not really. I knew why they stayed neutral. It was easier. It was easier to pretend nothing had changed, to avoid confronting something uncomfortable. But I wasn't willing to live like that anymore. I wasn't willing to pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. As the days passed, I saw some of our mutual friends drift away. Their loyalties were tested, and some chose Rebecca over me, while others stayed in my corner. I didn't blame them, but it stung. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the betrayal, the the way people had either turned a blind eye or tried to justify her actions. Even Rebecca's family had their own opinions. Some of them reached out to her, trying to console her. Others, like her brother David, didn't hold back. "You got what you deserved," he told me when I ran into him in the store. "Maybe if you weren't so controlling, she wouldn't have done this." The accusation hit me like a punch to the chest, but I didn't argue. It wasn't the time for that. It wasn't the time to defend myself against people who didn't understand. The longer this played out, the more I realized that the consequences of my actions went beyond Rebecca and me. It tore apart friendships, created rifts in family dynamics, and forced everyone to choose a side. But for me, it was all part of the process. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about accountability, about forcing everyone to face what they had been avoiding. The truth had come out, and nothing would ever be the same. In the days following the party, there was no coming back. I didn't try to fix things with Rebecca. There was no reconciliation attempt, no awkward conversation over coffee about where we went wrong. That had all been exhausted weeks ago. What happened at the party, the truth coming out, was the final nail in the coffin. I had no desire to repair a relationship built on lies. Rebecca disappeared for a while after the party. At first, I thought she might reach out, try to explain herself or offer some kind of apology, but nothing came. I waited, though. I waited for a few days, holding on to a faint hope that maybe she'd surprise me, that maybe she'd own up to everything. But nothing came. Not a text, not a phone call. And that hurt more than I could say. The silence, the absence, it felt like the most definitive thing of all. The fallout didn't stop with her. Our social circle shifted dramatically. People who had once been close friends became strangers, and the ones who stood by me were far fewer than I expected. Our mutual friends, people I'd spent years laughing with, sharing holidays with, were divided. Some sided with Rebecca, others with me, and some just backed off completely, unwilling to take sides. There were a few people who thought the way I revealed everything, at the party, in front of everyone, was unnecessary. "You could have handled it privately," they said. "Why did you have to embarrass her like that?" The question seemed simple on the surface, but to me, it wasn't. Rebecca had embarrassed me enough. She'd humiliated me over months of secrecy, dishonesty, and betrayal. I had every right to expose the truth, to show everyone who she really was. If I didn't, the narrative would have stayed buried beneath layers of lies and manipulation. I didn't care if it was uncomfortable. I didn't care if it cost me friendships. At the end of the day, I couldn't go on pretending everything was fine, pretending that what Rebecca had done didn't matter. I wasn't the one who broke the trust. She was. And if people couldn't understand that, I couldn't make them. For the next few weeks, things were a blur. I avoided social gatherings, avoided places where we used to go together. It was easier that way. I needed time to clear my head, to heal, but it wasn't just about getting over Rebecca. It was about reassessing everything. The friends who had disappeared were a wake-up call. They'd been the ones who didn't know how to deal with the truth, who didn't want to get involved in the messiness of real life. The ones who stayed in my corner? They were the ones who understood. The ones who weren't afraid to face the ugly parts of life. As time went on, I came to realize the full extent of the consequences. The fallout from the affair didn't just affect me and Rebecca. It rippled through everyone connected to us. I lost friendships, sure, but I also gained clarity. The people who stuck around? They were the ones who valued loyalty and honesty, who understood that sometimes things fall apart for a reason. And in the end, that was the most important lesson of all. The impact of what happened at the party reached farther than I thought it would. Family dynamics shifted. My relationship with some extended family members became strained. They couldn't understand why I had acted the way I did. They didn't know how much Rebecca's betrayal had hurt me, how much I'd suffered in silence, hoping things would get better. When everything exploded, the truth was out. And some people couldn't handle it. But it wasn't just about the loss of friends or family. It was about moving forward. I had learned that trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. And that was something I had to accept. The future seemed uncertain, but for the first time in months, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't the same person I had been when I started the relationship with Rebecca. I had changed, grown, and I was learning to value myself in a way I hadn't before. As for Rebecca, I couldn't say I wished her well, but I didn't care anymore. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. The truth had come out, and there was no turning back from it. In the end, the relationships I lost weren't as important as the one I'd found with myself. The aftermath had been brutal, but necessary. And now, with the future ahead of me, I was ready to rebuild.